We can agree on that much. Thank you. We're happy to be here, and I hope you're happy to be here too, in the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. I'm Robert McBride. This man is Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Good afternoon. Hey.
This man is Andrew Norman, who is an amazingly talented, creative, imaginative composer who talks very well about what he does and about music and the communal experience of all of us listening together. And tonight we're going to hear a piece for piano and orchestra that Andrew Norman wrote for Jeffrey Kahane, who will come on stage and play it for us. And I'm very grateful that you're able and willing to join us for these conversations.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Because you just have so many interesting things to say. Let me start with this. What did you think of last night's concert?
It was an amazing concert. I particularly loved the kind of journey that the whole concert took.
Rain.
Is that rain?
That is rain? Serious.
I'm from
rain.
LA, so I'm kind of unfamiliar with this phenomenon, but I've been loving it here. It's like rained every day.
It's welcome to Portland.
Yes, it's very exotic. Last night's concert was a journey, I thought, and I loved the way that the Bernstein and the Tchaikovsky kind of framed my piece, and they're of course completely different, and they exist in completely different worlds, and mine does from the two of them. But I think there are some threads that could be pulled out of both. So I enjoyed that. I thought the Tchaikovsky was amazing.
Thank you.
I'm glad that I'm before it and not after it. Because what an ending! Oh my gosh.
Yeah, after that you cannot say anything.
Yes. No. So, even if you hate my piece, there is some amazing Tchaikovsky after it to kind of.
But I promise you're actually you're not going to hate this piece at all. Actually, I think this piece is very, very enjoyable. I think the first reaction, and I don't think I'm wrong guessing this, is astonishment. Meaning of, sometimes you are astonished because there is a piece of music and you think, wow, so beautiful, wow, so moving, wow, so humorous. There are so many things that music can express. And with this piece, you're going to have a lot of wows.
I was wanting to laugh out loud at a few points last night because it really is entertaining and even, even kind of funny sometimes. It's a little bit like Carl Stallings' wacky cartoon music of decades ago with Liberace, and they're both on acid and they're reminiscing about the old days, and maybe they're both starting to kind of lose it a little bit. And so their memories get all jumbled together.
Ooh, I should stop talking about my piece and just have you guys. This is great. I loved that. I think a couple things. This is a piece that's made up of many, many, many different kinds of music. And they all sort of interrupt each other at a very fast pace. So it's music about juxtaposing these little tiny ideas that sort of exist in their own world and are always interrupted. I had this idea of Jeffrey, the soloist, who is a person I've known for a long time, and he asked me to write this concerto a few years ago. I had this idea that he was like the mouse in Tom and Jerry. And he's being chased around, particularly by the percussionists at the back of the stage, who are always cutting him off. And every single one of their instruments sort of turns him in a new direction and changes the channel into some other kind of music. And so it's a game of constantly playing catch-up. It's also a game of constantly being interrupted. And for me, one of the sort of journeys or trajectories of the piece is, can Jeffrey have a complete thought at the piano? And it's a funny idea, but it's actually one that I think is very much for me all about how we live in our world today, what it means to be bombarded with information, and how technology and devices and social media have changed our lives. They've changed the ways that our brains work, I think. I'm old enough, I teach at the University of Southern California. I'm old enough to have students who don't remember the world before the internet. And I think that their brains work differently than mine does. And I can't quite articulate why, but there's some ability they have to make connections and to move that is very fluid and fast. And I think in some ways that's part of what this piece is about. So yeah, the surface, there's going to be a ton of activity. It's very frenetic a lot of time. There's new ideas constantly coming at you. But underneath, I think there's, for me at least, there were some questions about, well, what does this mean? That
You ought to know.
well, I don't know, but that's like, I think for me, the artistic process is all about asking these kind of questions, and those were some of the questions I started out with. And then it definitely became this journey of will the soloist ever kind of escape this crazy labyrinth, and will they ever be able to just sit and focus on one thing for a period of time? So that's maybe a little intro into the piece.
I think that's very, very interesting talking about the brain, because I remember decades ago, I think I read an article, I vaguely remember, the only thing I remember is that the article talked about the brain as being comparable or a muscle, and that essentially we humans only use we don't use the entire muscle, we can use a little portion of that. And I thought like, oh, that would be cool to actually, if this is a muscle, let's use all of it, because then we might say something eloquent. And the interesting part of that is comparing to what Andrew is talking about, technology, the media, social media, and this bombardment of ideas, is I never could imagine that actually society would work more with this muscle called brain in that direction. I thought that, okay, people are going to be more knowledgeable, but I didn't think that actually multitasking would be the new normality. You do 3 things at a time, you look at this screen, that screen, and do something on the side, and that's normality, which is something I'm not really capable of doing. And
You know that's not true. Because you're multitasking when you're conducting. You are cueing this while you're conducting what's happening now, and you're letting people know that this other thing is coming up. You're turning pages in your score.
yeah, but I'm concentrated on music, and music is one thing, and at least that's what. Yes, I know very well what I'm doing. Meaning, I know my role, and I know that. Yeah, I better be there. In Andrew's piece, yeah, as we were, Jeffrey and I always have something to, and he said, I was crossing him in the hallway yesterday after the first piece. He was walking towards the stage, and I was walking away, and he said, this is not a piece I conduct without a conductor. This is not a piece I play without a conductor, because he sometimes conducts and plays. Mozart, you can do it. Beethoven, you can maybe do it. Andrew Norman's piece, not really. And the analogy of Tom and Jerry is wonderful. Another analogy to this piece is this idea that music is a long film, and then comes Andrew Norman, who actually invented the film, and then he takes scissors and cuts it up in little segments and does this, not at random, very planned, but it's little pieces of film, and this part has something to do with something that happens 15 minutes later, and this comes in 30 seconds. Stuff, little parts. So in a way, when I talked about you're going to have a lot of wow, the first wow is actually related to the bombardment of ideas. And actually, I didn't mention it because I know that you do, in this piece, you do what you do very intentional. But I was thinking about other composers, and I was thinking about a composer with whom I don't even know whether you like him, Richard Strauss.
Oh, of course, yes.
Well, hey. And that Richard Strauss once said about his music, when somebody was critiquing actually a piece like Alpine Symphony, which is 50 minutes long, and saying, well, yeah, it's what it is, but there is not so much substance in this piece. And Strauss was saying, Well, the thing that is different with him as opposed to other composers is other composers might have a few more ideas, but what he does with one single or two is nobody can compare to Richard Strauss. And he kind of was, I think that has something to do in the pieces that are, I mean, in Don Juan and Till Eulenspiegel, that's not the case, but yeah. And in your piece, I thought like, other humans would construct probably 4.5 hours of music just with what you put in this piece alone.
It's not 4.5 hours long, don't worry. Yeah, well, so we've been talking a lot about this notion of bombardment or fast things, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about what makes music feel fast. And though the fastness of music does have something to do with how fast Carlos is waving his arms, it also has something to do with how many notes per square inch there are on the page that those musicians have to furiously play. But more than that, I think the idea of fast music comes from how fast the musical materials are changing. And it's about the speed of the rhetoric. If I think of some of the great scherzos out there, in the orchestral rep, the ideas are very, very short, and they're always replacing each other very, very quickly. And this, for me, is what creates that sense of speed and kind of moving forward. And that's definitely, one of the things I was going for in this piece. So I also would say that though there are many, many ideas, I've never actually counted them, each one of them is on a little journey. And I won't include a sound or a moment or an idea in a piece unless it's part of some larger story. So as he said, I did kind of chop them up, and some of them you might get the beginning of the story way at the beginning of the piece, and the end won't happen until much later, but each thing is there for a purpose. And though the effect might be chaotic at the beginning, each one of these sounds is part of something bigger, and that's at least how I justify their existence and how I think it relates back to composers in the symphonic canon, where every single thing they do is about building an architectural shape and carrying each motive, each idea to its fullest potential. So I try.
This really is a wonderful program, beginning with Leonard Bernstein's sassy and a little bit tragic, and in the middle of the three dances that he wrote for ballet purposes. And On the Town, sailors in New York City having a very good time in a very short period of time. And then Andrew's wonderful 25-minute romp for piano and orchestra, which is called Split. And I came away thinking kind of a split personality or multiple personalities in the music. Every time I go to a concert with my sweetie, when we get to the end, I ask her what she liked best. And I was expecting her last night to say the Tchaikovsky, but she said she liked your piece the best. So that was really nice to hear. She'd never heard anything by you and just was really captivated by all those things you create and how well you do it. But I do have a specific question, and that is, there's a second piano hiding at the back of the stage in your music for piano and orchestra.
Oh, you're giving it away.
What's the deal?
The second piano is actually something that I added for this performance. So this piece premiered 3 years ago with the New York Philharmonic, and I decided after hearing it that I needed to completely rewrite the whole thing. And then, all of the wonderful thing about making music where you chop up music and rearrange it is it's kind of infinitely rearrangeable. And I've had great fun.
I can already see mayhem coming.
Yes, in fact, before each of these performances, I'm back there adding little things and rearranging to the extent that I can. But so I decided that our pianist up in front needed a kind of alter ego. And it's an alter ego that functions mostly with the percussion section, but the main function of this second piano is to be the little voice that says, nope, 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 like that. With every little thing that Jeffrey tries, the second piano is back there to kind of push him and to sort of be this little twisting, changing voice. And I thought of it as kind of this weird externalized part of Jeffrey. You might not notice it. A lot of the time it gets balanced in with the percussion, but it definitely has a few moments where it comes. And I wanted it to be almost like part of Jeffrey's mind, because you can't quite see it. And it sounds like a piano. It sounds like the sounds that should be coming out of the instrument at the front of the stage, but it's kind of like this part of his imaginary world. I don't know. Maybe that's a little weird, but
Speaking of weird and speaking of instruments, as I told you, sometimes when you do modern music, you encounter percussion instruments that you have not encountered yet. So in this piece, aside from the necessity of dismantling a truck to have coils there, I don't know whether it was a truck, but there are coils back there. But the real kicker for me was the flower pot.
Yes. Why?
Yeah, what?
Do any of you know percussionists? You know any percussionist person? You should make friends with the percussionists in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Percussionists are the most amazing people. They are the most sonically curious people I know. They are willing to make music on anything. And they're constantly out there. They're testing wood. They're going to the junkyard. They're going to Home Depot. They see musical potential everywhere. And I think that's really, aside from being funny, it's really beautiful. And I love experimenting with sound too. That's sort of one of my things to do as a composer. So I can't say that I invented the use of the flower pot, because lots of people have used flower pots in their pieces, but you can get a bell-like sound out of a flower pot. You can also get this lovely rubbing sound if you sort of stroke the flower pot. But all of that is to, in this piece, each percussion instrument sort of accompanies a particular one of Jeffrey's thoughts. And so my idea is to create as distinct a world for each one as possible. And one of them involves rubbing flower pots, because I like the sound. So
I like the sound too. It's just putting people like me, who is just not a percussionist. I read the score and I think flower pot, never heard. And then I go on Wikipedia and Google it and put flower pot music to see what comes up, and nothing comes up. And I'm like, what? I don't know how this will sound. And
I'll send you some links.
At the end, what comes out is a flower pot.
And a whole lot more in Split. The Split personality, small-ish, 25-minute piano concerto by Andrew Norman. Carlos, I have a request.
Uh-huh.
Would you bring Emmanuel Axe to town and have him play the piano concerto that Andrew wrote for him?
If I can. You brought a piano concerto for Manny?
I did, yeah. It's nothing like this
I want
one.
to say it must be slightly different.
Yeah, he asked for a piece that was not fast or hard. So.
Why did he ask you?
No, so I wrote him. This is.
Come on, last time Manny was here with me, he played the Burlesque by Strauss. That's really hard.
Oh, he can play.
He can.
He can absolutely play, but that was our first conversation. He was like, please not fast. And so I wrote a 20-minute slow, ruminative, meditative concerto for him. And that's one of the great things about being a composer, is I get to collaborate with all these different kinds of artists. And I really try hard to not make the piece just what I'm interested in, but also a reflection of that particular artist, what makes them unique and special, what their spark is. And with Jeffrey, he's such a live wire. His playing has so much character and life and vitality. I went in this direction, and with Mr. Axe, I went in a completely different direction. And it's like getting to explore things that I wouldn't find on my own if I didn't have these amazing collaborators.
That's very tempting, because I said, could you write a piece for
I mean, this orchestra is
orchestra and me on the
amazing.
podium.
I've had such an amazing week with you guys, and they have taken to this music, which is, as you can imagine, quite rhythmically complex and requires a state of precision, but not just precision. It takes a kind of forward and assertive. I'm struggling to find the right adjective, but they just immediately sensed what this piece was and inhabited it in a way that some orchestras don't. So I really appreciated it. It's an amazing band you have. You're all very lucky.
This concert is a real demonstration of the Oregon Symphony's virtuosity and versatility. Because the Bernstein and Andrew Norman are different worlds on the first half, and then Tchaikovsky 4 after intermission, which is completely different and magnificent, and you stayed to hear it last night. But I want to point out, before we talk about Tchaikovsky, this is the brand new Oregon Symphony CD, Carlos Kalmar conducting, all American music. Kenji Bunch wrote his wonderful piece, Aspects of an Elephant, which has rocks from his yard used as percussion.
Love it.
And a piece by your former roommate,
Yes.
and more.
Sean Shepard, amazing composer.
Aspects of America. It's on the table in the lobby. Buy one. I did.
All right.
Tchaikovsky 4. Wow. Completely different sound world than we inhabited in the first half of the concert. It comes out with this big, I want to say lush, but it's more than that, strong string sound. Wow. And I love that. They don't play like that at all in the other music, but then for this, you have them just transform to fit the needs of the piece. It's great.
Well, this Tchaikovsky 4 is such an. This is a piece that he wrote at the beginning of his, or I think during the writing of this piece, he got to be friends, which then lasted for the rest of his life, with Nadezhda von Meck. Nadezhda von Meck was an art benefactor, and she was absolutely in love with the music of Tchaikovsky, and she decided she's going to support Tchaikovsky under the condition that they never meet, which is true. They never ever met. And it was also during the symphony that a little bit later Tchaikovsky got corralled essentially and lured into marriage by a young woman, and that was not a great idea, because if you're homosexual, don't marry a woman. Not just to put it very bluntly and simply. Might not work, and it ended with divorce very soon, and Tchaikovsky trying to kill himself, and all this mayhem. But this is kind of the situation at which we find number 4, and to me it's even interesting. As every other conductor, I have conducted number 4 many times. Of course, it's one of those signature pieces, and maybe it's a thing where I like to think a lot about why do I want to do this phrase this way or this thing, all the things that one has to think about. And I discovered that when I was very young, of course I listened to this music, and I listened to Tchaikovsky 4, and for me it was always about this sparkle and this wonderful loud fast of the last movement, and I always chuckled at the third movement, because how can you write an entire movement that it's mainly pizzicato? Crazy. And now I'm way more interested in, or I learned over the years that the centerpiece of this music is actually the first movement, which changed in a way the world, how people think about Russian first movements, because it's long, it's extremely meticulous, and the ideas develop really in enormous grandeur. And what I like very much is that it's actually very dark. It's not really happy music at all. And then you read stuff like that Tchaikovsky modeled this piece a little bit after Beethoven 5, not technically, architecturally, but the idea, fate knocking at your door, and then I thought like, well, yeah, fate knocking at your door. It just sounds a little bit different from Beethoven, but it's the same thing. And the fact that it comes back at the end of the last movement is very, very, very telling. But this is, you know, I learned over the many, many years I have been relating to music that you go through phases. And sometimes some things in music, some composers just stay with you forever. Mozart is one of them. Mozart was always up there and still will be there. Tchaikovsky, there was my phase where I thought like, schmaltzy stuff, hate it. Until later you get, now I am kind of a mature, getting to maturity now, and I thought Tchaikovsky, he amazes me more and more and more. And to present Tchaikovsky's Fourth in this context makes me actually want to do it again and again, because we have two Americans of the 20th and 21st century composers who are very different from each other. And then we have Tchaikovsky, who is 19th century, very romantic and all of that. And all makes sense. Everything is one thing about expressiveness and what you can say to all of us.
And we're all together here, as fate would have it. Thank you for coming. I really think you're going to love this concert. Thank you, Andrew Norman, for being a nice man and incredibly creative person that you are.
Oh.
And thank you, Carlos, for being the most talented conductor, at least in the room. Enjoy.
Robert.